Hi, I'm Jo Sparrow, President of Jigsaw Queensland, host of the Adopt Perspective podcast. Today's guest is Bill Stewart, an adopted person born in Ontario, Canada in 1965. Bill shares his birthday with World Adoption Day, a coincidence that he doesn't love. He was adopted into a family with an existing biological daughter and experienced abuse in his home from his adoptive mother. Today, he joins us to share his story of childhood, silence, survival, reunion, and the long shadow adoption cast across his life. Before we begin, I want to acknowledge the broader Canadian context. I'm far from an expert on adoption in Canada, but in preparing for this conversation, I learned that in 2018, the Standing Senate Committee on Social Affairs, Science and Technology produced a report titled "The Shame is Ours: Forced Adoptions of the Babies of Unmarried Mothers in Post-War Canada." The report recommended a formal federal apology and funding for counselling and healing services, but to date, that national apology has not occurred. Some institutional apologies have been made. The United Church of Canada issued a public apology in 2021, and the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Vancouver apologised in 2022. These are important acknowledgements, but they don't represent a unified government apology on behalf of Canada. Activists, adopted people and parents of loss continue to call for explicit recognition of the state complicity and meaningful redress. Bill, thank you so much for joining us today. And I'd love to go back and begin at the beginning, I guess.
Hi, Joe. Thanks so much for having me on. I really appreciate the opportunity to tell my story.
It's great to have you here. Bill, what was it like for you growing up as an adopted person in your family?
I always knew I was adopted. I've heard a lot of other people's stories about how finding out at different stages in their life, but I can't actually remember when I was being told. I just remember from early childhood on knowing. So it was something that was always something I was always aware of and always present and present in the family. Discussed a lot. But there, it was an awareness.
Yeah. What was your adoptive family like? Can you share some of the memories and experiences that stand out for you?
Well, I was fairly fortunate as far as materially anyways. I got adopted into a lower middle class family, and they were, for lack of a better description, like sort of a typical family unit. And it was my parents, and then I had an older sister, and then I sort of completed out the set. They had a couple dogs as well. And as far as I think outwardly, as far as the appearance went, we've probably seen a pretty happy family overall, and doing fairly well. Unfortunately, in the house, it wasn't so healthy or so happy.
Yeah. You've spoken about experiencing physical and emotional abuse from your adoptive mother. If you're comfortable, can you share a little bit about that dynamic and how it shaped your sense of yourself as a child?
Well, I can remember. I've just always assumed that my mother had most likely, just to my understanding of people, and that most likely had some issues of her own that were never really understood or dealt with. I can remember early on when I was younger. I can remember things like if I didn't always eat fast enough, and that would upset her. And I can remember her being like her hitting me at the dinner table sometimes. And I can remember when people weren't around, one time her forcing food down my throat because I wasn't eating fast enough. I can remember her a lot, unfortunately, a lot of emotional and psychological abuse, just as far as the things that she would say to me. And I can remember some other people commenting on the fact that, like, when I was younger, I didn't really have an understanding of it being not being normal, and that I can remember people commenting on some of the things that she would say to me. Some of the things she said just sticking with me for years, and like for decades, really. It's not until probably about 20 years ago, I'm 60 now, probably about 20 years ago, that some of them really like stopped, sort of stopped being like going like a tape recorder in my head.
Yeah, that's exactly right, isn't it? It can be like the soundtrack that's running through the back of our lives, the things we come to believe about ourselves that simply aren't true, but they're the things that we're told to us by the people who should have cared for us the most. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
How did your father respond to what was happening in the home?
He didn't really participate. I remember just the sense of him not being happy with what was going on, but he didn't really do much that I saw anyways. I don't know, otherwise, but much that I saw to really stop any of it. But he wasn't happy about it happening, but he didn't really participate in it either. And that was I just think about that ultimately, like, he didn't know what to do. He didn't know how to deal with it. But yeah, like I don't really have a recollection of any sort of abuse from him at all. And so I was fortunate that way. But like I say, I don't think he really knew what to do about it.
What was your relationship like with your sister?
My sister, when we were younger, she would like sort of side with me, like with my mother when my mother was just being really angry at me or saying things. She would defend me in that. And then when when in adolescence, and couldn't really put it at what point, but she was like she was 2 or 3 years older than me, and she in adolescence she sort of switched and started siding with our mother. And it was a noticeable change, and it was just sort of at like, and it stayed that way through our lives.
Was adoption something that could be spoken about openly in your family, Bill, or was it something that sort of just sat in the silence in the background?
I couldn't really be talked about, and I don't think my parents really understood how to deal with it. And I don't think they were really given any guidelines at all by the government anyway to deal with things. And I do remember a few times I asking about wanting to know where I came from and asking, and they would just look stricken. Like they wouldn't say anything. They would just didn't know what to say, and they would just look so horrified by it. I wouldn't ask anymore, and I'd ask again. A couple of years later, I'd ask again or something. But it was something they just couldn't. They just had no idea what to say, and had no had no preparation for it. No model on how to deal with it.
Yeah. Were you ever given any messaging about your biological family? Were there stories told or assumptions that you made about who they were?
From there's nothing they said directly about my family. From some of the things my mother said, it left me with an impression. I just had a sort of a negative impression, but I also like I say, whenever I asked them about it, they just looked so stricken about it. It could have been something I generated as well too.
Were you always curious about your biological family, or was there a particular moment that sort of sparked you to think about searching?
Well, I remember always being curious, and I fantasized too, like through various points of my life with different heroes I had in that through childhood and adolescence. Of course, would fantasize about different people being my parents, and the long lost story, was there. But yeah, I definitely wondered about it, and it wasn't until I was older and I was trying to start a family of my own, and not having success with that's what really drove me to want to like beyond just wanting to know, like to really drove me to find to push me to find out.
And so how did you approach that process of searching?
Well, what finally happened is I finally managed to get some basic paperwork from my father, and this was pre-internet. And this was, I guess the internet was just starting back then. What I had was a sheet with basic adoption information, and it had information about my mother and her family. And I had enough information from that, and what they had at the time where you go around in towns. They had in the town library, they would have directories, and I guess they were directories made off of census from every year. But you could go in and you could read and find information. And I had enough information from the paperwork that my father gave me to put together, and my mother's last name was rare enough that I managed to actually find her and put it together. And the first person I phoned turned out to be an uncle, one of the few people who knew about me, who'd actually been there when I was born. So I got really lucky that way, considering at the time how hard records, how hard records were to access, and that things are getting better. And
It can be such a Oh, that's good to hear. It can be such a emotionally sort of tumultuous time, or even maybe a very numb time when we go to search. Can you remember what it was like for you emotionally?
Well, it was definitely it was definitely tumultuous is a good word for it because it was definitely um the I was lucky because my mother wanted to know me better. Very few people in the family knew about me, and they were very guarded about me getting to know her. So there was dealing with that was challenging. I've seen now like wisdom of hindsight, of course, the 2020. I would definitely now, if I was going to do it, I would probably get some support in going to do it because just we were both happy. Like it was good to meet each other, but we were both struggling with different things in our lives, and some kind of counseling or support in doing it would have definitely helped, and to help the whole to help with the whole situation. It was like I say, I feel like I've heard other people's stories, and I know some people have had no luck finding anyone, and some people, when they find the people, they don't want to know them, and that's got to be a really hard one to deal with. So I feel really lucky to have met my mother, and I even went up and stayed in the town that she lived in the town that I would have grown up in, basically, because she was still living where she was at the time, and stayed there for a couple months.
Yeah. Can you tell us about that first contact and meeting?
Well, it was definitely under sort of a shadow with meeting her, because with the family, because I was a secret in the family. And then after a bit, after I'd met her, it sort of came out, and it wasn't so much there wasn't that extra sort of pressure on top of it. But it was definitely it was definitely good to meet her. It's hard to say because you put so many expectations on that, and then they're just a person. Like that's where I think some like a bit of counseling might have helped beforehand, just as far as setting expectations. And that, because I think that was the one of the things for both of us that was challenging. We both had that about each other. It was good to see each other, but we both sort of dreamed about what the other person who I might have been, and then meeting them, and we're just both people hindsight. If had the wisdom to be prepared for that.
When you began uncovering the missing pieces of your story, because we're always a book that's missing the first chapter, adopted people, we don't know what sort of came for, what our initial stories were, I guess. What surprised you the most?
I guess, well, I get it's kind of funny with my story because my parents were together very briefly, and my dad was a musician in a band, and my mom was a fan, and it was literally the middle of the '60s. I was born in at the end of 1965. There's sort of this 1960s love story aspect to it. I've always been into music and that, but I hadn't really discovered the 60s and the music of the 60s that until my early 20s, and it was right before I found out about who my parents were. And so learning about this whole side of music that I had been kind of unaware of, and then finding out my parents were part of the scene, it sort of grounded me in history. Uh, I've always appreciated music and played a bit myself, so it's been really significant to me, sort of to find it sort of grounded in that. And
Yeah.
it was a good thing to find that out.
Yeah. Have you been able to connect with siblings or extended biological family on her side?
I have a few siblings on her side. I've made brief contact. There's three altogether. Very brief contact with two of them, and one, we're Facebook friends, and we just acknowledge each other every once on Facebook. I got to meet them when I was up there, when I went up and visited them. The one I'm in touch with grew up in the same town, like, with our mom, and as sort of the person who I would have been if I'd stayed with my aunt and hadn't been separated. Like that's the so she hadn't known about me, but so she was happy to meet me, and happy to find out that she had an older sibling. But yeah, we stay in touch. It's good to have that. She acknowledges me as her brother.
Yeah.
It feels good.
Were you able to connect with your biological father or paternal siblings?
I met him briefly, and I have a couple of half brothers through him, and I met them briefly as well too. And I think for him, he didn't believe that I was his. And then when we met, it was obvious just with the looks and personality wise too. It was kind of really obvious when we met and started talking. My mother introduced us, and we just hit it off right away. And I think to him, it was hard because up until then he thought, because he'd gone on and he'd gotten married pretty soon after, and had two sons with that woman, and he figured his life had gone a certain way, and then to meet me and realize that he'd missed that opportunity. Like I could sort of see that with him. Like that was like he was happy enough to meet me, but I could see that affected him that way, that he wondered what might have been. We tried to stay in touch with email and that, but ultimately didn't. And the siblings, I met them briefly. The family's musical. My dad plays an instrument. My two half brothers play instruments, and I don't play anything. And I just wonder if that sort of set us apart a bit. If if he'd known and I'd stayed there, if I would have been more of a musician, or more into music that way. But yeah, we didn't. It was good to meet them, but no, ultimately we didn't stay in touch.
Yeah. Bill, when we first spoke, you said something that really stayed with me. You said that you felt like a branch that had been grafted onto a tree, but it didn't grow healthily. Can you talk to me about what you meant by that?
I've done a lot of gardening and worked with plants. The metaphor really came to me just because I've seen grafting done, and grafting done well worked well. And grafting, it can happen where the branch will grow, but it doesn't take well on the tree, and you can but after you know I- after a few decades into my life, anyways, I kind of look back and thought, because I'm surviving. I've still alive. It just didn't seem doesn't seem that I developed well in my life and developed well emotionally, and that's sort of the grounded in the like definitely in the dynamics in my family. And I also wondered too now, because because for the majority of my life I didn't really understand some of the dynamics around adoptions, because there wasn't really an understanding that just adoption itself might be problematic. There is I've always sort of had the theme of loss has been something that's always been through my life, and I've always kind of wondered at it, because it it it's it's reoccurring for me, and it's almost like in my life sometimes with relationships and that, like I'm looking for people to play that role of loss, that is that essential loss that I feel from the loss of my mother, and I'm trying to sort of re-experience it, to bring it to the surface. And I can't, again, it's not something I thought about through my life, but as I'm getting older now, I'm looking back on it, I can't help but notice that scheme across, and wonder if that's not the source of it.
Yeah. How has adoption impacted your life, your relationships, your mental health, and your sense of belonging, Bill?
I sort of got used to the idea of sort of being other, like being the other, or being othered in that sense. And I think, unfortunately, socially, a lot, it's easy for me to sort of just default to that, because it's an easy enough it's an easy enough feeling to be used to. I think I'm lucky, because I've had some experiences that have just really made me appreciate life itself. I kind of even in some dark times, in that it's just the the kind of the refusal to give up. As I've gotten older, I've noticed like suicidal ideation was definitely something I struggled with when I was younger, and now as I'm older, it's like I've lived long enough where I'm that's kind of shifted now to curiosity. So I don't really, it's not something it's something I used to default to a lot, but I wouldn't it was just sort of a coping mechanism for me a lot too. But there were definitely some times that were darker, that were more about dealing with the urges, and that I just try to focus on the things, and try to focus on the things in life that really do work for me. Like I'm fortunate to, uh, live in Canada, and the places I live in Canada have access to nature. A lot of nature around, and nature is always going on, getting kind of grounded in nature is always a good thing.
Gosh, I hear that a lot from adopted people. And I feel like that too. Like when I'm out in nature, that's when I feel, I guess, a spiritual pull, or I don't know. That's when I feel most connected, I guess, is when I'm out in nature. And I've heard that theme across a lot of adopted people.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely works. I mean, there's no what not to find out.
So, Bill, why did you want to share your story on Adopt Perspective?
Well, I ran across some of the podcasts on YouTube, and they were just what I was looking for, and particularly around the theme of survivors of coerced or forced adoption, hearing about the different stories and finding the similarities and the differences. And it was just really, really healthy to watch, because a lot of stuff on adoption is from an outside perspective. You have a really good forum there. And so when I saw the opportunity that I could just, I could submit and ask, I thought, well, I'll give it a try, because it's from the adoptive perspective as opposed to looking at it from the outside.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm so glad that you did reach out. I've enjoyed getting to know you and hearing your story. And I know it takes a lot of courage to get to that point, Bill. And I just want to really acknowledge that. And thank you so much for being on the podcast and sharing your story.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity, Joe. You do, it is a really good forum. Like I say, like you make it really comfortable and really easy to talk about it. Because it can be challenging. It can be challenging. People mean well, but they don't necessarily understand.
Yeah. And I truly hope that the Canadian people impacted by adoption get their apology, and more importantly, get redress and funded to specialised support services with people who actually do understand adoption. I hope that for all of you. For everyone tuning in, every adoption story is different, even though there are many common themes and every story matters. If you're looking for support resources or simply a space to be heard, please know that Jigsaw Queensland is here for you. And if you'd like to support the podcast, leave a review, share this podcast, or get in touch, because we love hearing from our listeners. And I know our guests love to read your comments on their episodes as well. And if you have your own story to share, head to the Adopt Perspective page on the Jigsaw Queensland website. Just look for the podcast tab and you'll see our prospective guest form right up the top there. Thanks for listening. I'm Jo Sparrow, President of Jigsaw Queensland. Take care and bye for now.